Oh, all right. April 2023, MacAdmin Monthly. Hello, everyone. Yeah, after a month off, which isn't a bad thing, we're back. And man, what a crew we've assembled this time. The Titans of MDM. But the announced guest, of course, Jesse Peterson, Titan of MDM. Hi, how are you?
Hi, I'm doing well. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, of course, of course. For those who don't know you, who are you and what do you do?
Yeah, so I am a CPE, ostensibly, and kind of been doing the IT support thing for most of my professional career, going back almost 20-ish years now. Started at a small IT consultancy, who I'm still friends with, and most recently, I've been at Facebook or Meta for almost 5 years, a little over 5 years actually. Um, yeah, and I do CPE things, so all things related to macOS management. But of particular focus the last few years has been Apple MDM developments, especially in the open source space with micro MDM and nano MDM and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I think like let's unwind that a little bit. First off, I don't know that everyone's adopted the CPE terminology. So client platform engineer. Some companies have started using that instead of IT. I don't know. Everyone has such an aversion to saying IT, but I'm fine with it. I like IT. But CPE, um, there are CPEs and then there are CPEs, right? Like I think the larger companies, Google doesn't call it CPE, but the equivalent role at like Google or Amazon or you're at Facebook, um, Netflix, Airbnb, probably even Dropbox. Like anyone who's a CPE there is doing more than IT or sysadmin work. So yeah, let's talk about that. You're more than just like managing a handful of Macs.
Yeah. So the way I kind of think about the difference between those, and everyone has their own thoughts on this, is we do a bit more engineering um, of the than your sort of more traditional sysadmin type roles or IT support um, roles. I think actually Mike Dodge has a talk or two specifically about this. And if I'm not mistaken, I think he was one of the originators of the acronym that we use nowadays, the CPE term. Um, so yes, but the way I think about it in my head is kind of we do lots of supporting engineering, and everyone does engineering to more or less degrees, but the specific way that I think our CPE team does it is, you can engineer IT solutions for sure. You can deploy the thing that people use, etc. But I think the defining thing for our teams is that we engineer the stuff that other teams use to deploy to company laptops, for example. And that distinction is a little bit different than certainly a smaller house would be, right? Because we have all sorts of different internal teams, security, help desk, just internal teams that develop software like work chat and stuff like that. So they use our systems that we've engineered on the machines to deploy their settings or policies or what have you. And so yeah, we're sort of that underlying engineering layer rather than directly implementing the solution to fix the thing or implement the thing.
So, if I'm understanding that correctly, perhaps instead of just one centralized team that says like, here's our corp Mac OS, you might let other teams like security say like, hey, here are the settings that we want on Macs for security, and like we'll give you the PR or change list or whatever you call them internal to.
Yep, absolutely. So one example might be if the security team wants to change a profile that's being deployed to the Macs to, for some changing security reason, we maintain the ability to where in the source code where they can make those changes, how those profiles would get deployed and sent out to machines. So all of that infrastructure stuff, so that all they have to do is change the setting itself, and then the rest of it kind of does its magic. We do the underlying magic part, and they're worried about the policies and the specific settings and that sort of thing. And it's the same for software distribution. Our team doesn't do that portion, but another wing of our CPE teams deals with software distribution. So if a internal team needs to deploy X, Y, or Z software, the CPE packaging team takes care of all the infra to get software and things onto the machines and installed correctly and audited and logged and blah blah blah.
Got it. Oh, that's interesting. I wasn't even sure if you might have pushed some of that back to the team that wants it deployed, because I think that it sounds similar, not exactly the same. But Rich Troughton often talks about the release train at SAP. He's given a few talks. He has a blog post on it, but it's very similar. Like his core team basically says, like, "Oh yeah, you want this thing done? Go do it. We'll approve it, right, and vet it and make sure it's reasonable. And then like you're going to be the maintainer of this. Like you want the next version on there? Great, you go do it."
Totally,
right?
We're huge fans of that. Just because it's a large fleet and there's a lot of tools that we aren't the experts in, right? So it's better for those teams to have ownership over those things. And all we maintain is the ease and ability and reliability of getting those bits on the machine, but the actual bits that run, that's the responsibility of the end team, and we'd prefer it that way.
Yeah, nice. Can you mention the size of the Mac OS fleet that you manage?
It's there's things in the news. It's gone up and down over the years. I think we've been as big as 100K max before. It's and then you can just apply the recent news to how that sort of fluctuates.
Sure, it's still, you're way past the point of walking around to machines or dealing with that. And I think also once you're past 10,000-ish machines or so at all, like you start seeing all of the edge cases, right? You start seeing all.
Yeah, it starts speaking, especially if you have a relatively homogeneous fleet of things that go onto the machines. Those edge cases really start poking through really quickly.
Yeah, and
I think the weird stuff comes through.
Yeah, and one of those is certainly the recent Apple software update debacle, where
there's just one.
No, I guess it's a cluster of debacles.
Yes.
But the primary one being like, "Hey everybody, go update your machine," and you click on software update, and it's like, "Nope, you don't have any updates. I don't know what you're talking about."
Yes, my machine is currently afflicted with that.
So, yeah, again, managing a smaller fleet, you can kind of deal with that in a handful of ways, right? You can, you're making your help desk aware. You can potentially reach out to people based on like the oldest, sorting by who has the oldest machine. Like, okay, hey, please go do this, right? Like, I'll walk you through it or whatever. But in a large fleet, that's, you really have to deal with it programmatically.
Yes. Although it's hard to programmatically handle the edge cases because by definition, they're way out there in the weeds often.
Yeah, but I guess at your scale, if you have enough of them, like sometimes it's worth like, okay, 100,000 machines, we have, 5,000 spread out around the globe. They're not all in one place, right? Like,
sure. Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So I know you mentioned earlier MDM, and it's always the big question. Tell us how you fit into that that world.
Yeah. So and just to quickly go back to the previous topic, when I started at Facebook, we were still over that 10K mark.
Oh, yeah.
They've been huge for a long time. So especially coming from where I came from with my previous career, that was a huge jump. So going to that many machines was kind of an incredible jump and then managing devices on that scale is is hugely different. Okay, so back to the MDM thing. So before Facebook, I and some folks were kind of dabbling with open source Apple MDM. For me, it was mostly a curiosity thing. Like, okay, how does this thing work? What is it doing? This is way back when it was coming to OS 10.7 originally was the Mac OS version that MDM started with, along with profiles and things.
And
So
those are also, that was back in the day where like that documentation was sort of like a well-kept secret.
That's right. Yes. You could only get to the documentation if you had a developer account. And even then, I think you had to have special stuff. It was
more than a developer account. Yeah.
Back in later in 2011, I think there was finally a Black Hat conference that kind of exploded it all. And so everyone got to know what the protocol looked like underneath and stuff like that. And since then, Apple has been allowing a bit more participation in that public documentation, et cetera. So it's less of a secret than it was back in the day. So it started with just kind of playing, and Pepine had been playing with the IMAS server, which actually came from that Black Hat talk.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was a Python server. And so that was just kind of a POC, kind of fun little play thing. And then from there, created an MDM called Commandment, which was another Python server, but much more fleshed out, more features, something looking like an MDM that you could actually use rather than just a proof of concept type thing. At the same time, Victor Vranchin, or Groob or WikiWalk, started creating micro MDM to manage devices, and the initial kind of cool thing that everyone was interested in at that time was zero touch deployment, or close enough to zero touch deployment. Back at JNUC at the time, or maybe PSU MacAdmins, there was a big presentation by IBM on how they did this with Jamf, and that kind of blew everyone's mind. Like, oh my gosh, unwrap a shrink wrap Mac and have it deploy itself. How cool is that? Which was completely different from what everyone was doing at the time. And so that really sparked interest in what MDM could do and how we could get machines bootstrapped using MDM. So this was a primary focus of micro MDM, the open source project, early in its inception. How can we bootstrap these Macs to get them into people's hands without having to pre-deploy them or like pre-set them up, which is how most of us were doing it up till then. And then so micro MDM kind of plod along for a while, and I moved to Facebook, and we actually kind of came late to the MDM game at Facebook, mostly because all of the other tools for managing Macs at the time were great. They worked great. Monkey and MSC, thumbs up. We use Chef, and you could do everything you could do with MDM. You could just do better with all of these other tools on the system, and so we did. We didn't really have a need until the day came where the I think it was called the UAKEL profile. This was the first profile payload that you had to install. You had to have a user-approved MDM enrollment to be able to install this profile so that you could allow kernel extensions to run. And if you're in a large company, you're probably deploying some software or another that requires a kernel extension, for better or worse, mostly worse. And so to pre-approve those kernel extensions, you had to have this profile payload, but you had to have a user-approved enrollment. And so we deployed micro MDM.
That was your first MDM out of the gate, micro MDM.
Yeah. It was 2018 or something like that.
Wow.
Yeah, and micro MDM did very well for years and years and years, until it kind of didn't. And we get to credit Chrome for that, which I'll explain in a second. And then we have deployed. Well, we created Nano MDM, and we've since migrated to it as well. But yeah, the Chrome tie-in there was basically in the Chrome profile, and there's different ways that you can manage Chrome nowadays with the I think the Google Enterprise Management Console. I forget what they call it these days, but you can do it all in the cloud basically. Um, but you can both block list and allow list Chrome extensions. And so when you do that in the profile, that's cool. Except when you've got thousands and thousands and thousands of them, our Chrome profile turns out to be a quarter megabyte or something like that all together. Like literally to this day, you can't go into the system preferences pane. As soon as you click on the Chrome profile, your system preferences is frozen because it's so large.
Yep.
And so what happened is, our fleet. So you're sending around a quarter megabyte profile to every device for every change. That gets very large very quick, and the architecture-wise, micro MDM wasn't suited for that, and thus was born nano MDM. So I touched on a lot of stuff there. I hope that's good.
Yeah, absolutely. Excellent. So
one question. Wasn't it before you went that way and before you joined Facebook that they had an MDM? I think it was Jamf back then, and they moved away from that, moved on to Chef, because as you said, everything was great. And then this story came in. So they may had a reason not to look into the commercial market, but directly go for, we suffered that way. We don't want to go there again.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm wrong here, but
yeah. So before, if I'm remembering my history right, before Jamf was an MDM, it was a Mac management platform, even before it had the proper MDM protocol integrated. And so you could manage Macs without MDM proper, right? They weren't enrolled in the sense that we know MDM enrollment to be now. So, but you are absolutely right. And Mike Dodge has this talk at a JNUC or something about our movement away from Jamf. But yeah, Facebook used Jamf on all the machines, and so we moved away from Jamf to Chef.
Yeah, thanks.
That was actually before my time, even at Facebook. So I don't know as much about that particular change.
Yeah, that must have been one heck of a Jamf bill, by the way.
Yeah.
But I mean, I definitely, sort of having been at a larger company, a larger tech company that likes writing their own code, I certainly understand the desire to say, like, yeah, we're going to go do this thing ourselves and we can customize it to exactly what we want. But yeah, I see Eric posted some links in the MacAdmin Monthly channel, and I think one of the key things that people should know is that, like, all this is open source. MicroMDM, the current iteration, it's open source, so you can go check it out. You can go download it, try it out, see how it works, look at how it implements the protocols, APIs, all that good stuff, and I think this is what Airbnb is using, right?
Yeah, they are also using MicroMDM. That's right.
Right, and I know Brendan Kurtz had a talk around this, and well, Graham Gilbert had a talk a number of years ago about how it almost killed him implementing this sort of at scale, inside Airbnb. But now I think that's also an open source project for them. It was MicroMDM Orchestrator or MDM Orchestrator or something Orchestrator.
Yeah, MDM Director. Yeah,
MDM Director. That's it. Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, very cool. Very cool to see, open source working and other people getting to use it and contribute back to it. So yeah, I think smaller companies probably are better served with something off the shelf, but I can certainly.
Yeah, I think that's worth noting. On the open source thing, I definitely want to mention Zach, who's also here in the VC here, because the nano MDM being open source, and in particular because it's very tiny compared to micro MDM. It's a much more smaller implementation and is much better suited to, for example, embed into another project, which is kind of how we do it internally at Facebook. But the announcement today that Fleet now has MDM capabilities is kind of fun because at least a portion of it also uses the same code.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah, absolutely. We're built on Nano and components of Nano, components of Micro, and it's been super cool to kind of take these abstractions and build up to higher and higher levels, and hopefully bring kind of the deeper understanding of how MDM works and the more open MDM ecosystem to more folks using the stuff that's been done here. The way I keep thinking about it is it's like the MDM protocol is like assembly or machine language, and then you've got something like nano MDM is like C, putting C on top of assembly, but it's still quite low level. And then, moving up one more level, I think, to a Python, or maybe even say some sort of lower code kind of platform is what we're attempting to do with it.
Yeah, I mean, I think overall, not to get too far off the Jesse Peterson story, but it's super exciting to, like, as a consumer of this, really, like, just to see more choice out there, because I think we've had a very long time of like Jamf being like the choice, and whether you love it or hate it or have no opinion or whatever, like, choice is always good, because it's very rare that you find a product that is truly like one size fits all and one product does everything. So, we have just right in this chat, right? We have 2 open source products, Zentral and Fleet, that have added on MDM and are starting to ramp up MDM with their product, and some paid versions, Kanji, and then Micro MDM, like pure open source, use it if you want, or Nano MDM, use it if you want, figure it out, implement it in your organization. So I think that's super exciting. And of course, they're simple MDM, and I think the one that I've lost track of is what became of Fleetsmith. I know Apple acquired them and they have this product, but I don't know anybody actually using it. They have to have customers. I haven't heard anyone say, yeah, we're using the Apple thing and it's good, bad, otherwise.
I've heard a few folks using it. I think it's fine for very smaller shops for sure.
I think they say it's up to 500.
Yeah. Okay. That would make sense.
Like, I think they purposefully limit it. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think, with all the commercial and the open source solutions, we do know at least what the feature set looks like. And this is the Apple MDM is a bit like, you don't know where it really shines or where it just like fails. No, the last thing I know was Fleetsmith.
Yeah.
Exactly. I do want to call a little bit of attention to the layering that Zach was talking about, because this is, in the open source MDM, in the micro MDM space in particular, we have this sort of saying that's in our documentation that says micro MDM is not a product. And I mentioned that because, lots of folks are like, oh, open source MDM, this is great. Maybe for some folks that means they don't have to pay license fees. And that might be a significant thing, like if you're a small nonprofit or something like that. And sure, open source is great. But I need to focus for folks on the fact that micro MDM is not a product. And the sense in which I mention that is, if you do choose to set up micro MDM or nano MDM or one of our open source components, you really are kind of assembling your own MDM. You're going to have to put integrations on top of it to support anything advanced at all. So unless it's the simplest of MDM cases, for example, that initial deployment of like setting up Macs, something like that, then there's significant investment in the infrastructure in micro MDM. So one of the products, a more off the shelf product, like you were mentioning, Ed, is very viable. So just go in eyes open if you're looking at open source MDM, because there is significant investment there, and one way or another, there's cost. Yes,
and I think that goes back to the point that Graham Gilbert was making in his. I think it was at MacSysAdmin,
Yeah, sounds right.
2018-ish or so, pre-pandemic. But he talked about like he would never do that again. I think was his kind of outcome. Just it was so difficult. And, I mean, I can understand that. And again, working at scale, changing the tires while the car is moving sort of thing. It wasn't with MDM, but, I remember being, at Google, like deploying Puppet and like, hey, this is great. And then you make one change and like, oh, we broke the whole fleet. And like, now you need some other way to kind of come in and undo that or save yourself. And then you do that. And like, there's some other little thing. It's like, oh, what's happening here? This is melting down. So yeah, MDM, again, with it being so new in some ways, that it's still, people are still figuring it out to a large degree. But yeah, I wanted to ask a little bit about that. What have you found to be the most challenging thing with MDM? I'll leave it as a very open-ended question.
Yeah, there's lots of stuff there. Gosh. Well, kind of on this note, I get to call myself an MDM developer, but I actually think that's a bit of a cheat because, with micro MDM and nano MDM, we deal at this super low protocol level. And in some ways it's kind of easy. It's just bits in, bits out, make sure that the protocol works in the way it's supposed to and the devices talk to it. I think the much harder thing to do is actually to implement policy and do useful things with MDM. And this is what your commercial MDM vendor is going to implement, right? So if you need to implement, say, file vault on your machines, that's back and forth with a profile and another security info command, and you got to escrow the keys, and right there's a workflow and there's policy involved in that. So that's difficult stuff that a commercial MDM has invested in to sort of expose that in an easy way to their customers. That's hard in the sense that we don't really have anything like that sort of built into the product, right? So literally, if someone starts asking about those things, it's sorry, you have to develop that yourself, which is not very satisfying for someone who wants to deploy an open source MDM. But that's one of the harder parts is, and in particular, the way that MDM version 1 works with the command response format. So you have to coordinate all of these commands together to get something useful at the end of it. It's not as easy as it seems at first. MDM v2 or declarative management, I think, is very fun once it becomes useful. I don't think it's quite there yet for us sysadmin type people, but when it does, that will, I think, allow some interesting things to happen. So there's a hard thing. Coordinating actual useful workflow / policy stuff through MDM is not as easy as it seems.
Yeah, I mean, I do think there is this push-pull between Apple's vision for MDM and where we actually are right now. Perhaps like Apple keeps saying like, oh, well, you should do this thing with MDM, and then people in the field, are like, well, it doesn't work, right? Or, you're asking us to update our machines with MDM, and guess what? We send the command and it just doesn't work.
Software update, yep. Exactly.
Yeah, or like there's a whole bunch of examples, I think, where Apple is like you see their road stretching off into the distance, and like the sunset is just MDM, right? Like one day you're going to do everything with MDM, and Apple, like, I don't know, if you talk to certain people at Apple, like they think we're there already, and like we're so far from it, right? Like,
sure.
So I mean, what kind of frustrations does that cause you? Like, is it a protocol thing? Is it the client? Is it the MDM client on the Mac that just doesn't quite sync up?
That one in particular would be the bane of my teammate, Joe Chilcote. He does a lot of testing around this, and I don't have positive things to say about it. So, yeah, it's not great, and it's been broken for a while. And I think um, yeah, it's not functional enough to be really useful by itself. So, as a lot of folks know, we have to implement workarounds and things like Nudge, which has been a lifesaver really for our fleet. So
Well,
instead of the
I think
machines sort of updating themselves or directing it through the MDM protocol, we have to push that onto the end users through modal dialogues and stuff like that.
yeah, I mean, I think Nudge in some ways is a better experience in a lot of ways anyway, because it generally allows people to kind of choose
Sure.
when they do their update. Like they're made aware of it and they get to choose, like, oh, I'm in the middle of something, I'll do it later today or something.
Sure. I mean, ostensibly though, I mean that's supposed to be supported on macOS, right? With the install later thing, which is supposed to prompt the user and then they can have some choice in how long they defer and stuff like that. But it's just so unreliable that we literally can't consider it in any useful way.
Right. So I guess that's my question. Where does that unreliability come in? Is it the client on Mac OS, the MDM client? That's just
Yeah, I think so. As far as getting commands to the devices, the reliability of the MDM protocol itself, that all seems fine. It's just the actual doing the useful thing at the end of it on Apple's side, the MDM client, and or I'm not quite sure what XBC surface talks to what, but the software update daemons and all the various things that are used to install software on Mac OS. Yeah, there's some unreliability there that is built into Mac OS that is unreliable. That needs to be worked out.
Yeah. I mean, I think some of it's just, I don't know. That example in particular, I'm not sure of, but I think there is also, again, sort of this tension between how iOS works as a platform, where MDM works really well, and the paradigm of Mac OS, where you still have a user account, admin, whatever we want to call, whether Apple's clamping down on what admin can do. It's still like an admin user that might be running things that can't easily be crushed necessarily to go do the thing MDM might want to do, either update an application or update the OS. Where on iOS, like, I don't know, it restores state really well. If an app isn't running, it's fair game to just sort of like update it, or update the OS.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Graham just popped in. First off, Graham, you must have heard I mentioned your name 3 times, and I must have summoned you, I guess. Graham just popped in. MDM doesn't have a concept of, is this a good time to install an update? And yeah, I think that's, again, sort of the tension we're seeing between like how iOS works as a platform, where MDM was really kind of premiered, versus Mac OS, which is like, it's just a different thing.
Grafted on a bit more, yeah.
But I think it's also because on iOS, people have it in their hand constantly, while on the Mac, you're in a totally different mood. If your iPhone just, it's now rebooting new OS, it's a totally different thing for many in comparison to, my Mac is, how long does it take? And besides, even if Apple has fixed, the software update and the deferral, the user experience with this small notification and you can choose it in comparison to what Nudge or different, similar ideas give in terms of user experience. I think as long as Apple doesn't provide that kind of interface, those third-party mechanisms still shine. That's my personal opinion, but yeah.
No, I totally agree with that. And I think again, a lot of these open source solutions, like, so much thought was put into them. Like Monkey, the update mechanism in Monkey works so well. It works better than, I guess Jamf is one of the ones that I have to compare against right now. But like, if you tell Jamf to go update an app and it's a running app like Chrome or Firefox or something, it's just a miserable experience. Whereas Monkey handles it so well and can prompt the user. Like first it can check, is this thing running? No, great. I'm going to come along and update it. Oh, it's running. I'm going to pop this note to the end user. So yeah, there's this whole well thought out user experience. Even with Nudge, that's so much better than like for what MDM's doing more or less right now from the Apple side.
Yeah. I'm not super familiar with it, but I see people who dabble in both Windows management and macOS management kind of look towards the Microsoft history of them doing it in certainly in some ways better.
In some ways, I would say like Chrome OS is like top of the heap in terms of management and updates, but then again, like as an end user, I don't love Chrome OS necessarily. I don't know. It's not quite the same, but as an administrator, the amount of control you have over a Chrome OS device is second to none.
Yeah, I think there's a dividing line between platforms that can run arbitrary code and platforms that can't. So like iOS, Chrome OS, those can be. I think those are different beasts than an arbitrary code running machine like a Mac OS or Windows device or Linux desktop, whatever. Yeah,
totally agreed. I recently we recently had some consultants, and the fastest way to sort of get them up and running was using AWS workspaces, and we rolled out some Windows AWS workspaces, and thankfully one of my teammates is like a good Windows admin, from sort of a past life, and he immediately was like, oh, GPOs and blah 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 blah, blah. And it's like totally locked down, did all the things up to date. That wound up being a pretty good experience. So yeah, I mean, I think there are good ideas all over. I kind of want to get them into one place, so we can use them easily. So what's next, if anything, for Nano MDM?
Yeah. So in the big Nano MDM blog post, which is now almost 2 years old now, it's kind of crazy how fast the time flies. One of the big goals there was to start picking up on MicroMDM v2 development, which I kind of alluded to in that write-up, that it would use Nano MDM as the core. Whereas so MicroMDM would sort of be the more batteries included MDM, whereas Nano MDM is very strictly just the Apple MDM protocol. So MicroMDM would be a bit more user-friendly, a bit more batteries included. It would have DEP included like it does now, stuff like that. But getting to MicroMDM v2 that has some of that stuff built in has been a goal of mine, even though I haven't had the time to to give to it. Another thing is seeing where and giving time to declarative management. So created the declarative management server that kind of pairs with Nano MDM, and that works well enough. But I think this WWDC will be interesting to keep an eye on. Apple has almost directly said any new MDM functionality is going into declaratives, so please implement that now. So we'll see what they have to say.
I don't think I've seen a smaller when Apple said declarative is the future, that was the biggest typeface I've ever seen in WWDC history.
Yeah.
I think declarative is incredibly exciting, right? And it's where we want to get to, and potentially replace some of our config management tools and things like that. But we have to get there on Mac OS, right? It's yet another not really on Mac OS quite yet.
Yeah, I mean it's had some disappointments. The declarative in particular, some of the problems that it intended to solve had some early bugs that were like very, very frustrating to see at all. But yes, I totally agree with you. It is the most exciting thing to come to Apple MDM in a long time, and I'm super excited for it.
Cool. Graham, Hi, welcome. What made you pop in mid mid journey? Did you know that we were talking about you and Airbnb?
I have a Slack notification for MDM Director.
Oh, well, that explains it. That explains it. We did mention MDM Director, and we mentioned your talk at MacAdmin 2017, 2018, when you were talking about how implementing this yourself was
Pain and
almost
suffering.
the death of you.
Yeah.
How do you feel about that today?
No one should run open source MDM ever.
Okay.
I'll stand by that.
Yeah, but we have no choice. Yeah.
Sure. How do you feel about your decision running that? And
Oh, we made the right choice.
yeah, okay.
We win.
Two separate things. Yeah.
We definitely made the right choice, but it's the right choice for very few people.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think that's what we said pretty early on, like the Airbnbs and Netflixes and Googles and Facebooks of the world. Yeah, there's probably a good reason for it. Whereas smaller shops, yeah, don't put yourself through that.
No. We're very lucky in that we have two basic software engineers running it.
Yep. Very cool. Anything else we should know or you want to add, Jesse? I know we spent most of the time on MDM, which kind of makes sense, but anything else that you're working on or strikes your fancy in the tech world now that we should know about before we jump to conferences or anything else before we wrap up?
I can't think of anything.
Fair enough.
There's a ton of stuff. I just can't think of it.
Yeah, that's fair enough. I totally get it. So we always talk about conferences. You're going to be at any conferences? This is the year. This is it. Conferences are actually coming back in person.
That's what they say. Yeah. So as Nick said the last session, our whole team has a carve out to come to YVR this year. So
excellent.
That'll be pretty exciting to see all of us there. I don't know who else is going to show up there, but that would be cool.
I'd like to. I love Mac DevOps. It's a fantastic event. I think now that they're coming back in person, I think we might end up seeing this sort of like people breaking out into regional conferences, right? Like I know I'm considering Penn State because I can drive to it. It's super easy. I don't need author. Like it's not only the pandemic, but I think it's just, I know in the whole tech sphere, spending is down in general, and it takes more authorization to get to spend money on travel and conferences. So, like for me, if I can say like, yeah, I'm going to this conference and it's going to be super cheap, right? Like that's a sell versus like, I'm in New York, right? So like, hey, I'm flying to Vancouver and going to this kind of small conference.
So some of that was absolutely the case for our team. So this is a little bit special in the context of the broader Facebook kind of situation. So yeah, but the other thing is also that 4 of our team members are in Seattle. So it's very, very close to Vancouver. So
they can just bike.
They could.
Well, super. That's a good one. I know that's coming up relatively soon. Are you or anyone else from the team speaking, or are you just attending?
Yes, as it happens, we are speaking.
Nice.
Yeah, one of our team members, Calvin, who sometimes shows up in the MicroMDM office hours, is going to talk about MDM.
Fantastic. That sounds good. Any plans past that, or you're only looking at as far as Mac DevOps?
Yeah, it's barely. That's far enough for me at the moment. I don't even know what's going on next week.
Yeah. I know. Sometimes it's just, you can't look out that far. But yeah, like I mentioned, I know Penn State, I guess, or actually we have did it happen already? Macaduck? Or that's
No, it's end of May, I think.
end of May. Okay, so it's I know.
Yeah.
Okay,
I think it
How
was
is
end
it?
of
that's coming up. Mac DevOps, Penn State going to be back in person. That's usually right around the same time, June-ish or July-ish.
Yep.
JNUC, I'm sure. I don't track JNUC, but it's sometime.
I don't think any of us won WWDC lottery or anything like that. So
Oh yeah,
maybe
Yeah.
some iOS developers on. I'm not sure.
yeah. WWDC goes without saying almost. Like
Yeah.
we all know about that one, and yeah, I guess I don't understand what they're doing. Like they're having people for the keynote, but it's not a week-long event like it used to be, where people get together, right? They're still like they have people for the keynote, and then they're just dropping videos the rest of the week. Am I right? I don't know.
Are they doing that this year? I forget what they were doing. They kind of did that last year, didn't they? I'm not sure if they changed it this year.
I think it's just mostly videos. I think
Oh,
they're
yeah.
trying. I think they're
OBTS. Sorry.
yeah, I think they're trying to get people out to, like, there was this period of time where DubDub was so contentious to get a ticket for, right? People would still go out, and there was this whole ecosystem around WDC. Just the fact that there was a critical mass of people there during that week. So people, even if you didn't get a ticket to WDC, there were a bunch of little conferences that popped up around WDC, accommodating the people who didn't get a ticket. And, it was just good to, catch up with people and go to dinner and see people who were like just all piled into San Francisco or, San Jose after that. Well, before that and after that.
A bit of a Mac IT back in the day.
Yeah, Mac IT. That was always January, though, I guess, right? So it was a little separated from DubDub, but
sure, yeah. I'm just saying the nature of what you're talking about, kind of San Francisco, and you can kind of glom on even if you're not actually going to the conference, and everyone was and it was stuck to Macworld and etc.
Yep. So, Eric, you'll be at RSA, 12 days. Yeah, RSA.
Is it in 12 days or does it run 12 days?
Both.
No, it's in 12 days, and it's Monday through Thursday.
Actually,
Yeah.
I have a question to all of you. So the GitHub Apple Device Management project, which doesn't see many updates, so literally every major iOS and macOS release, it something happens, but it's not interesting code or news pushed there. Is this really a reference that we actively use or transform into profiles, or is it more like we all got excited in the beginning, but yeah, it's part of what you see also in the Apple documentation? So is anybody of you making extra use of that resource? It's all YAML files for the commands, it's YAML files for the profile description. It's all there, but
yeah. I mean, so a few years ago, I guess, they implemented in the MDM documentation site, you can look at the changes between versions. So you can kind of see if a command was added or if a field was added to a command or something like that in the documentation, in the HTML. So in that sense, we've kind of been able to see the changes as to the MDM protocol as they come along for a few years now. But yeah, the YAML files are really interesting, at least from a development standpoint, because you can start doing fun things like auto generating command structures based on the definitions that Apple has provided. So in that sense, they're kind of fun and neat. But as far as like picking up changes or anything like that from them, and also they tend to publish those changes to that repo late. I've noticed. So you'll notice things in other places like release notes or Appleseed IT notes way before the changes show up in that repository. But I've written a parser for the YAML files that generates Go structs for the MDM commands, for example. That's kind of fun.
We considered using them as a linter because, fun fact, if you push an invalid profile, the Mac will just keep trying to install it. So our system extension profile is expecting an array, and we put a dictionary in there. Obviously a valid plist, so it passed that linter for us, and then our MDM just kept trying to install it, and we were wondering why our security team was wondering why our EDR wasn't working. Oops. So yeah, we were going to build a linter, but yeah, as Jesse said, they're not updated very quickly. So we're like, are we going to fail CI just because Apple hasn't updated this thing?
I think it would be totally different if that project would be more live, or if you could see the changes in the branch, and but that's what I'm missing from the device management project on GitHub.
Yeah, one minor thing that's missing there is the fields in the DEP profile. They've got almost everything else, commands and DDM declarations and profile payload keys, but they don't have that. One note about linters and plists: don't put anything that's not a string in your launch D plists in the program arguments. Recent changes in Ventura will make you have a very bad day.
Sounds like you have some experience with that.
We have some experience with that.
Did someone try to include an emoji?
It was an integer key. They just forgot to cast it to a string, and so it was like string, for /path/ binary, and then an integer that should have been the string representation of the integer as a command line argument. But it turns out that gets passed to the new service management frameworks. So LaunchD itself is fine with ignoring that, but the new frameworks completely explode service management D, which means all of your LaunchDs that aren't Apple's do not load. So you could imagine every single critical service on your machine not launching, and any third-party thing that's in a LaunchD not launching.
Oh, it speeds up the Mac, though, right?
Yes, quite efficient at that.
Sounds like a good attack, to be honest. If I want to turn off a bunch of stuff,
Yeah.
Sure. I might take advantage of that. I don't know.
Or it's the modern way of extension manager in macOS 8.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay, so quickly to rewind the last set of conferences, I think we want to talk about, Eric, it was so helpful to put this in the chat. October, MacSysAdmin, back-to-back with Objective by the Sea. And I'm happy to see that they're not colliding in the same week this year, even though that in some ways that makes it worse because now it's two kind of full weeks of stuff that you have to pay attention to instead of trying to cram it all into 1 week. But yeah, I'm still trying to factor Objective by the Sea into my life, but we'll see. One day.
Let's go to Spain.
Yeah, I know. I'm thinking of trying to use MacSysAdmin as a front for that, and then on the way back, just stopping in Spain. But I don't know. I haven't looked. I'm not sure if I know Objective by the Sea sells out very quickly. Usually, I'm not sure if it's sold out already. So I might have the decision made for me. But
we went the first year. That was very fun.
Yeah.
In
Maui.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. Hawaii was the first one. Yeah, super cool. Well, I know we're coming up on an hour, and I always try not to go more than an hour because who wants to listen to people talk for more than an hour? But yeah, Jesse, thanks so much for joining. That was great information. I'm thrilled to see your projects out in the world. They're definitely helping make other projects better. So thank you for that. Yeah,
thanks for having me. Lots of fun.
Yeah, my pleasure. And we'll wrap it up there and see everyone next month. Thanks.
Bye.